and then this is our first time back in person. So we're really excited to be here. We want to thank SEFCU, a division of Broadview, for donating this space for the event. It's a beautiful space for us all to meet. And after this event, I'll have had the honor of featuring 19 amazing women in public relations. So, yeah. So one thing I found that's always kind of fun is instead of me introducing the panelists, I let them introduce themselves. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order, and I'm going to ask each panelist to please describe what they do, their current position, what inspired their career path in PR, and how they discovered PR as a career. So I'm going to start with Gina.
Okay. Hi, I'm Gina DeRossi. I work for Global Foundries right now. I got started in PR. My interest really started when I was in high school. I did an internship with the governor's press office, and I was able to do, it was just like a 1-week thing, and that was when I learned, that people don't always get quoted by actual quotes. You might write their quotes and then they sign off on them. So, but I found it to be very interesting. I had an interest in broadcast journalism, and I went to the Newhouse School of Syracuse University, and I started in broadcast journalism, and very quickly, after one semester, realized I did not want to be the person sticking a microphone in people's faces after a tragedy, and I'd rather be helping plan for crises and positive spin and such on things. So that kind of brought my interest, and then from Newhouse, I went and worked for a high-tech PR agency in the Boston area for a couple of years. Moved back. I wanted to be closer to my family, to the Capital Region, and I started working for a company called Masto Public Relations, which was later acquired by Soterix Corp. And for combined company, I worked for them for 17 years. So most of my career was in agency life, doing a lot of external public relations and helping with events and that sort of thing. And then about just over 2 years ago now, I just had my 2-year anniversary, I moved into Global Foundries in the corporate world, which was an interesting move, from agency to corporate life, but it's been a great fit. I did a lot with my community too, as far as I had been on my school board and city council and some campaigns, and I found that that's really been helpful in my current role. I'm a corporate communications lead, and I primarily support our facilities in Burlington, Vermont, and East Fishkill, New York, but I also have responsibilities here, in Malta, in the Capital Region, and work a lot with our government relations and human resources groups. So I found all that experience made it very helpful, and I like this particular role because it allows me to do more employee communications and reach out to employees and internal. So I think that was all there.
Hi, I am Melissa Keys. I'm the Director of Accounts and Media Strategy at Relentless Awareness. There I oversee various accounts, spanning across different industries to ensure that their messaging is being delivered efficiently and effectively. Prior to Relentless Awareness, I worked at WAMC Northeast Public Radio, where I was in charge of running their, we'll call it their advertising department, but it's their underwriting department, and my team was responsible for bringing in $3.2 million in sales. So from that perspective, it was much more sales and marketing, and then even before my time with WAMC, I worked with the New York State Association of Counties, and I also worked at Eric Maurer and Associates. And my path to public relations was a little bit more of a detour. I kind of wove in and out over the years. My first job at Eric Maurer, I actually didn't want to work at an agency. It didn't feel right. It was not a good fit. It was very slow going, wasn't very challenging. But in my current role, much more challenging, much more fast-paced, and it's a very good fit and a very good feel, and I'm happy to have found my place back in the PR world. I think for me, my interest in PR actually came in college. I had originally been focusing on radio broadcast, but it was a course at the College of St. Rose that I took with a Professor Regina Luttrell, where it just clicked. It all made sense, it felt right, it was something that I could actually see myself doing outside of college. I think a lot of times when we're in college, we're talking about jobs and in the future and not really seeing or understanding fully what that looks like. And there was just something about this professor and her teaching where it was so clear to me to see, yes, I can see myself doing this for a very long time. But that's my story.
Thank you. Jody, would you also talk a little bit about the APR? When
Sure,
you introduce yourself. Thank you.
I am Jody Orachowski. I am the current APR chair for our PRSA Capital Region chapter. I am the Assistant Director of Communications and Public Relations at Capital Region BOCES. I oversee, along with a few others, and you who are here tonight, our Engagement and Development Services Division. So we serve school districts across New York State. I counted the other day, we're up to 83 school districts with communications and public relations strategy and support. I have been there for 10 years now, and this is my third role at Capital Region BOCES. So I started out as a communications specialist, spent some time as a communications manager overseeing a team of specialists, and now I get to work with the managers regularly. Prior to that, I actually did very similar work at what is the equivalent of a BOCES in Connecticut. So every state has regional educational service centers that support school districts with things they can't pay for themselves or wouldn't be able to staff appropriately. So our communication service is actually probably in most of the districts in which you live or work in here in the Capital Region and then far beyond. I have always been in some sort of education-related public relations. I did undergraduate and graduate studies in PR and communications, but always felt that my calling was for purpose-driven work, and so I really was looking to stay in the nonprofit sector. I was in a higher education nonprofit in Boston while I was earning my master's degree in communications, and really just felt very strongly about ensuring that what I was doing was actually going to benefit the greater good. So that's kind of been my career path. I earned my APR in 2013. I was moving from Connecticut back to the Capital Region to be closer to family as well, and felt like I needed a competitive edge to be marketable. I didn't really know much about the job market in the Capital Region, having not really spent time here as a professional outside of growing up. And so earned my accreditation and felt like that really was pivotal in me being able to talk the talk as well as walk the walk. I just kind of did what I did and didn't really realize that how it would professionalize my skill set, and so I felt like that helped me in my job search.
Thank you. Jessica.
Okay, so my name is Jessica Otutigwe, and I will most likely describe myself in terms of the things that I'm passionate about. So I'm a mom, I'm a visiting professor of communications at the College of St. Rose. I call myself a business storytelling strategist for my soon-to-launch consulting company, and I also see myself as an urban gardener, mostly container plants. But my experience and interest and desire to pursue communications, public relations, I'd say most likely started in Nigeria. I was actually born in Nigeria. I remember one day watching the news and seeing a reporter on television, and her name was Jessica Savage. And I saw that and said, oh, I also want to be a reporter. Kind of also indirectly, my father was a professor, so he taught journalism and mass communication, so I have experiences of going with him to class in Nigeria and then also the United States. So I think that's also, I feel that's also where the interest in working within higher education came from, because I remember going to classes with my dad. So in terms of my professional experience and academic experience, it was pretty traditional, I would say, academically. I studied English and theater at SUNY Albany. I went to Albany High. I decided I wanted to be a reporter. I went to Columbia and then broadcast journalism. Realized that I did not want to be a reporter because I did not want to move to the middle of nowhere. And I also wanted to live in New York City. Who doesn't want to live in New York City? So I stayed in New York City, and I would probably say this is where my professional experience was more non-traditional because I really hustled. I worked as a PA. I did a mix of different jobs. I found a television studio in Harlem through the Yellow Pages, which we no longer have. I think I'm dating myself if everyone knows what the Yellow Pages is. But I found a television studio through the Yellow Pages Drum Television Network. It was a community-based television studio, and from there, I started working with them on programming for their public access channel. That connection also led me to working at NYU, and I started teaching at NYU a television news production class, which I taught for about 11, 12 years before making the shift back to upstate New York. And from there, I worked at RPI for about 15, 16 years and decided that I wanted to change. I wanted to pursue something different. I wanted to go back to teaching. I started teaching at Maria, and then I started teaching at the College of St. Rose, and I've been at the College of St. Rose for about 2 years. This is my 3rd year starting teaching all the advertising, marketing, and PR classes. And I think, for me, I've always been very passionate about storytelling. I think that's the most important thing. When I think about public relations, advertising, and marketing, what I tell my students is that it's a story that you're telling that's going to make itself relevant. And so when I think about the things that I'm passionate about, all the things that I mentioned earlier, being a mother, I'm the mother of, my daughter graduated about 2 years ago. She's the first Black valedictorian from Albany High. So I shared saw some of those stories, and it allowed me to be able to tell her story and put my skills to use for something that was very personal. In terms of the visiting assistant professor position, I'm working with students and I'm helping them to understand the importance of storytelling and connecting them with businesses in our community so that they can understand the relevance and apply what they're learning in the classroom to something real. As a business storytelling strategist, I'm passionate about helping different types of businesses learn the importance of storytelling, especially not-for-profit startups and small businesses. And as an urban gardener, I think there's just a story, in being able to see something grow and cultivate. So I do all my stuff in containers. But I think we're going on to 3 years and counting, and I've been pretty successful with my crops.
Yeah. And I'm the moderator. I'm Heather Schechter. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Sunrise Management Consulting, which is a property management company based in Latham. And I started in PR. I actually probably was crossing paths with Jessica because we were both at Columbia at the same time. I was an undergraduate and I had an internship. I was a history major, so I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was looking at different careers, and I knew I loved writing, and I knew I loved communicating, and I knew I loved people and interacting. So someone told me about PR as a career. I just kind of happened across it, and I applied for an internship at Edelman Public Relations in Manhattan, and that's how I started. And I continued working in Manhattan at agencies for 4 years after college, mostly in fashion and beauty public relations, moved up here to the Albany area, has been proposed, and I thought, oh, PR couldn't be that different in Albany, but it was. So I lasted about a year at an Albany agency when I decided I needed a new career path and actually went back to school and got my master's in education, taught 12th grade social studies, and then once I had my first child, I thought, you know what, that's enough with kids. So I took a break from teaching and ended up kind of consulting, and I took on my current company as a consultant, and within a couple months I started there full time, and now it's been 6 years. In my time up here, I really enjoyed being active with PRSA. I was the president back in 2018, and I feel like it is a great organization for those looking for community among people who work in PR. PRSA is a great place to find it. So, all right, my first question. Over the past few years, many external forces have impacted the way we do business, including the practice of public relations. There's been turbulence in public health, politics, and social unrest. The pandemic also led to many people changing where they work, our communications methods, tone, and messaging. Would each panelist please comment on how public relations has been affected? I'm going to start with Melissa.
Okay. So during the pandemic, at that point, I was actually working with WAMC And a lot of the businesses that were underwriting with the station varied from small non-for-profits, performing arts venues, right up to some larger corporations. But what we saw was a drastic change in their messaging. Not only did we have to pivot in how we were conducting business, but also understand now that the messaging that our business partners are having to deal with are changing almost weekly, sometimes daily. Messaging going from talking about the latest CDC guidelines and how we're compliant, and performing arts venues saying, sorry, there's no season this year, but please still support the arts in this fashion. Restaurants saying, no, you can't come into our stores, but please support us through takeout services. So, a lot more of a kind of, bringing the message back to supporting local community and trying to really help sustain each other through this, crazy, time. And to the point about how it affected us with our business relationships. I mean, in the sales world, I know a large portion of my team, they interact with these clients on a daily basis, and that personal connection and being able to meet with that person face to face and engage with them is such a pivotal part in building that relationship. So to have that ripped away and forced to be able to communicate, via Zoom, and again, the difficulties in struggling with, some of the, technology that is involved in doing that was frustrating and added another layer of inconvenience in having to do business. So I think from my standpoint, the biggest things were really the messaging, but also how we conducted ourselves. And I know from when I came on to working with Relentless, that also stemmed to working with their clients, where same thing, everything was conducted via Zoom. Now, to that point though, there is a convenience to that now that I think we're all kind of realizing is kind of nice, right? Instead of having to carve out travel time to get there and travel time to get back there, and having to, maybe bring all your materials with you to do a presentation, the convenience of being able to do it now, over the internet is still, I think, beneficial. But I think there's still a strong argument that can be made that those personal connections and those personal relationships are really integral in how we conduct our business and form those relationships with our clients. Going back to messaging, I think also looking back at not only were we going through a pandemic, but there was a lot of other things going on within our communities, going on within our country, that also changed messaging. We heard a lot about Black Lives Matter. We heard a lot about, DEI and equality and all these things. And, now we're at a point where we have these, terminology and what do businesses do with that? Are we engaged with that? Is this authentic? Is this real? Or is this a marketing ploy? Is this, to kind of corporate wash things, so to speak? And for somebody who is, an out lesbian, when I graduated college and got my first job, there was no DEI. There was no, it wasn't verbalized, but there was an undertone of, you are an extension of the company, and if our clients aren't comfortable, you being affiliated or representing us, then, maybe we don't want you kind of around these clients, we just want you around those clients. And even that has evolved so much, to the point now where we can walk into a workspace. I will say there's much more work that needs to be done, but we have come a very long way where we can walk into a workspace and feel safer through measures like DEI and bringing awareness to equality, We don't have to, feel uncomfortable in our work environment. We can feel more authentic and more safe in our space, which is, I think, creates a better employee. If you're able to work comfortably and safely in your work environment, you're going to produce better quality work. So not only did the pandemic shape terminology and messaging and how we conduct business, but I think it also made businesses really take a hard look at how authentic they are in interacting with their audience.
That's a great point, yeah. And I know Jody being in schools, that whole work environment changed, and the messaging changed, and public relations changed, so.
I did,
What
just
did
a
you
little,
see?
just
Yeah.
a little. I will say, I didn't share this with the panelists before tonight, but a week before all of the schools shut down, we were having a meeting, and a couple of our colleagues came in and they were starting to work on some planning because they were prepping for schools closing down. And I have never been more wrong in my life, because I was like, shouldn't we just treat this like a case of whooping cough or like some other communication that would typically go out from schools? You have all known about the lice outbreak in the school. You just gotta let someone in your class has lice. Okay, fine. So I was like, well, how is it any different? Man, I ate my words. Obviously, a lot changed in schools. And I will say, I've been with the communication service for a while now. And when I first joined the service, there was a lot of, our communication approach was very much in the third person for our school district. So we would take more of a news approach. Like, while we're embedded in the district, we would still use the third person when an incident occurred, during crisis communications, emergency notifications, things like that. Whereas it was this, if we had a beat reporter and we were that person. And over time, we started to shift that approach. We started to really think like, okay, so humans are running the district. We serve people. That really is the business that we're in, and we're providing education. And so we started to change and think more about tone and our messaging prior to the pandemic. But I think that really, it changed entirely, because people were looking to school districts to help educate and feed and provide for their children, their students. And it really was very important for our school districts to be able to connect with families, to let them know we understand it's a really unprecedented time. I think we used that comment over and over and over again. But there was also this very strong messaging around safety, and that we understood, right? And we were doing the best that we could, and we were in this together. So in the Capital Region in particular, superintendents met daily in the beginning, and then as time went on, it turned into weekly, but agreed that communication and messaging should have a similar approach, and actual operations for schools should have a similar approach, so that somebody who sent their child to a district like North Colony wasn't following a different protocol than their neighbor in Manans or Waterville. So this whole area of leadership started to work together and collaborate with their communication staff, which happened to be all of the members of our team. And so it was really powerful to see parents come to rely on messages from districts that their kids, it might have gone out an hour sooner or the night before, but they knew what to expect, because they were like, oh, this district just said that they were going to be doing this, and masks are still required. It was this calming presence in some way, that they weren't going to be operating alone, and so that was really a big difference. And then just as the pandemic continued and social justice issues were the summer of 2020 in particular, a colleague of mine often says this, and it really does ring true, that anything that's happening nationally will find its way to the front steps of our schools. And that was certainly the case in 2020. And then it became about, what you were talking about a little bit, Melissa, with messaging. So superintendents, many of them were like, we have to say something, and they just wanted to add their voice. And we stand against racism and all these things. And our advice started to really dig into, why are you saying something? Is there action behind it? Because if there's not, you have members of your community who are gonna come right out and call you out on it. And it really has become this ongoing work in diversity, equity, and inclusion in our public schools, surrounding the idea of this mission that provides for all students, and what does that actually mean? And if we're serving all students, then we absolutely have really the responsibility to ensure that that means all. And so, as everyone is probably aware and pays attention, school districts have increasingly polarized audiences. So parents who are adamantly opposed to DEI initiatives, you've heard, critical race theory and social emotional learning, and these really just education jargons that have turned into political movements. And so it's become a really interesting job in the sense of trying to maintain credibility and trust, and also listen and meet people where they are and try to dispel rumors without getting too far in the weeds, because really the intention of our schools is to educate students, and that means all students, and so we have a duty to be inclusive. And so it's been an active couple of years in school PR.
Yes, and I know, Jessica, you were also in that school environment where the issues were coming to your door and things were changing, where people learned and how they worked.
So definitely, I mean, I think that the pandemic, and all of us can attest to this, changed how we live, work, and connect. Within the higher education setting, we went from seeing our students every day, depending on your classes, to going to a virtual space. And even in that virtual space, I realized that there were different things that I had to change within my classroom, because now we're online. We had to have conversations about boundaries. We had to have conversations about access, because many students, if they were on campus, or perhaps some students who chose to be home, they were struggling with technical issues. They were struggling, and they were also competing with siblings that are also trying to get online as well. So there's a lot of other dynamics that students were dealing with. We even had to have conversations about mental health, because some students are used to being in the classroom and having that face-to-face connection, but now everything is virtual. And I don't want to have my camera on because everyone is going to see where I live, or where I work, or where I sleep. So for me, as an educator, we had to think about, what can we do to make the experience more meaningful, and how can I also meet my students? It also changed I pretty much threw out my syllabus at that point, because it also changed the topics that we were addressing. I'm a news junkie, so a lot of the things that we're talking about became current event topics that were taking place, because as you mentioned, the things that are happening in the world are going to trickle down into, onto our doorsteps, and in this case, for many of the students, into their homes. You had students who were struggling with issues related to parents who were either being deported, or students who are dealing with family members who lost jobs. And so now there's a lot of concern about, how are we going to maintain where we live? How are we going to have food to eat? And this is the reason why I'm not showing up to class. And this is the reason why I'm falling behind. And so it was really important to me to find different ways to connect with my students and also be flexible. And even the topics that we addressed, we took a lot of the current news topics and found different ways to have those conversations in a virtual setting. So it became more of a conversational approach to a lot of the teaching that we were doing. And then also too, I was interested in the student input, because again, because these students are focusing on advertising, marketing, and public relations, at some point they may decide to go into this field. So the conversations become, what is your experience? And if we do a simulated version of how are people communicating, what makes sense to you? So we did an exercise where we looked at the communication related to the COVID-19 response at the College of St. Rose and other colleges and universities. And the students were able to do an audit and kind of really break it down to see how are colleges and universities communicating to students, who was doing it really well, and what were some of the ways that students needed to have information shared with them. And even in that, it also created spaces where students want to be involved in the experience and sometimes the decision making that colleges are making. We know that can't always take place, but in the communication exercises that we're doing in class, it created spaces where students were able to identify, like, these are some of the ways that different programs or different departments can target students so that we can be included in the conversation. And I think at the end of the day, one of the things that we also realized is that, mental health was also something that we needed to consider in this conversation, because definitely the pandemic changed how we live, work, and connect. It's still here in different, iterations. It's not something that's going to go away. So I think, Melissa, when we talked about being in spaces and becoming, comfortable in these spaces, we also talked about how can you become comfortable in these spaces and in these conversations that are uncomfortable? How can you create messaging around things that are uncomfortable to talk about, especially because of some of the different things that were coming up from public health, politics, or even the social unrest. So those are a lot of the things that we were seeing in the classroom setting.
Thank you. I know, Gina, you're in a very different work environment at a multinational company. So what did you see happening in public relations and the way you were communicating?
Yes, building on a lot of what the other panelists have said, certainly being global, one of the major things I saw is sensitivity, right? We had, even recently, where we're at different stages in the pandemic than some of our colleagues across the globe. We had an instance recently, the US was opening up more, able to do more, and we had colleagues who were on lockdown for 2 months, couldn't leave their house. It's a totally different feel, right? And you have to be sensitive to what they're going through and not kind of very celebratory about, that things are opening up. So I think that balance was a really big part of it. I also started during the pandemic with Global Foundries. That was a unique experience. With my previous job, I knew everybody. I had been working with them for a while, so when we went remote, it wasn't such a big deal. But starting and trying to build relationships, it was a unique way to. You had to find ways to communicate and to connect, and mostly through Zoom or video, and you were, to the point made earlier, you were inviting people into your home, right? So now you have, oh, hey, are you in a different room today? Oh, there's your kid. Oh, there's your cat. So a level of personal space that you were now inviting people into, and that you were seeing that of your colleagues that you never knew about before. But I feel like it has gone into, even with things opening up more, you still have that understanding of what their life is like, and maybe some people have high-risk family members, or they're high risk, and others are not, or some have children. Even the aspect of having a spouse or significant other, and you're both working from home, and you have a kid learning from home, and how do you balance it all? And dog barking in the background. All of that balance was brand new. Even the language, right? The COVID-19 pandemic. Pandemic was something you heard about way back. Pandemics weren't supposed to come back around. Now it's everyday term, right? Everything was changing on a dime. You turned on the news and suddenly it was all different. So how do you change how you're communicating with your employees and authentic leadership, right? I think that's really important. And I think that Tom Caulfield, our CEO, did a really nice job of making sure that employees felt like he was connected to everyone. He was on top of everything with health and safety. Like the superintendent you were speaking of, just making sure that people felt like our leadership was in the know and was looking out for them personally too, not just professionally. And the other thing I found, which I thought was great, was there was really a unification around shared experiences and supporting communities as these political unrest things came up. And our DE&I efforts ramped up even more than they had been, and we have a lot more employee resource groups now for Pride or Bragg and veterans, et cetera. So, and they're we encourage allies as well. So it's a really safe space, and I really enjoy that aspect. And now that we're kind of more in person, that we can meet up and such. And then to another point I just wanted to make about being able to do technology and do these meetings back to back. That was an interesting thing of going back in the office, right? Because now suddenly you had to build in time of, wait, I'm over there and I have to be over there. I can't do a meeting that ends at 10:30 and the next one starts at 10:30, So that was another new aspect coming back into the workplace that was a consideration during this time period.
Thank you. Now, in these last couple of years, PR was changing, the world was changing, and a lot of us had to learn new skills or teach new skills to keep up with different communication practices, different messaging. So what have you had to learn or teach others? And we'll start with Jody.
Well, at one point, I would joke that we should really all just look at master's degrees in public health, because that was obviously something we all had to learn on the fly in terms of communication and what things meant. And but in general, throughout the time, I think the skill that really was most critical and important has been leadership. So authentic leadership, as Gina mentioned, but leadership in a time of uncertainty and empathy. So understanding that who someone is and what they might be facing is it should come first and is more important than anything else you might do that day. And so that, what I saw throughout the last couple of years through all of this in particular is folks' ability to lead really meant all the difference. And those who really struggled to understand what was at stake and didn't really demonstrate a whole lot of empathy had a harder time than those that did. And I think, everybody was looking for strong leadership and then realized that maybe they had to be the one who was leading. And so that really, for me, was the biggest.
Now, Jessica, I know you had to throw out your curriculum initially, and then if you're building it back up, are there new skills that you feel that people need to learn after all this?
Sure, definitely. So I think that, one of the things that I always tell my students is that you need to focus on the storytelling aspect. So even though we talk about public relations, storytelling to me is the most important thing. And so you're learning a mix of different strategies and tactics to tell those stories. So for my students, I remember when we were initially telling stories, or when I was telling stories, we would just write up a press release, email it, and that was done, or cold call reporters. And when social media started to be a thing that we were including into our outreach efforts, it was Twitter and Facebook. And I was like, I'm not going to use that. It's like, I'm going to do it the old way. We're going to fax or email the press release and call the reporters. Fast forward, we're in 2022, and there are a gazillion social media channels out there. And so that's one of the things in our conversation is understanding that public relations is a field that is constantly evolving because the platforms that we have to share the message will always change. When you're working with the different clients, you don't need to be on every single channel, but you do need to find the platform that is going to be relevant for that particular organization in terms of communicating the message. So for me, it's really looking at where is social media going, what are some of the different elements within social media that students need to be aware of, and then also even examining the different businesses and organizations and kind of also looking for alternative platforms, not only for social media, but then also for creating content. Because we also see with the change of the pandemic, we also see the great resignation. And you see a lot of businesses that are losing employees because employees are pursuing their passion that they identified during the pandemic because everyone was at home. And so you have these businesses that now have to take on some of these communication responsibilities. So when my students are working with clients, we're also identifying different platforms that are user-friendly for them to use so that even though we create the initial content for them in terms of the story, we want you to be able to take that and continue that experience and become comfortable with these different platforms, whether it's social media, whether it's something for graphic design or video editing to continue telling your story.
Thank you. So, and Gina, I know you said that, you were in a whole new work environment, so during this time, but what are the new skills you feel like you had to learn?
I think that having a lot of patience, maybe not a new skill, but trying to be more patient, just again with people in different places and different situations in their lives, just understanding and patience, I think, throughout not just personally, but throughout your team, throughout your company, and in my case, globally, right? So that's one. And then creative ways of connecting, right? Just trying to find ways to build team building and connections, especially for me, because I started new. I remember my first year, we had a virtual holiday party, and I created kind kind of the grab bag thing, and I wrapped everything up and put numbers and showed them on the screen, and people would pick them and swap them, and we just found like a creative way to connect, and still be a team, and it was just a neat way to, and everybody loved it, and some people even took my games and played them with their family at the holidays, so that was kind of neat. But just ways of connecting and understanding. I think just an emotional intelligence feel not just for leaders, but everyone in the company. Everyone needed to have that level of emotional intelligence. And then finally, just like flexibility. Again, as I was saying before, just things were changing so quickly and on a dime. Being able to adapt to that and change it and stay on top of it and just say, okay, we're going to change fast, and drop that and move on to this. So I think flexibility was another big thing to I changed focuses on, and the skill had to get a little strengthened there. So.
Thank you. And Melissa, I know you're working in an agency, then you went to NPR, then back to an agency, and I'm sure you had to learn some new skills in that time. So.
I had to brush some things up, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think I'm going to kind of echo what Jessica said. I think honestly the biggest change has been social media. Starting at Eric Maurer, I think, the recommendation was like, oh yeah, make sure you have a solid website and have presence on Facebook. And that was kind of it. Now we're talking about, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube now. There's so many other platforms now, and I think, the biggest, as you mentioned, it's always evolving, and I think, from a traditional standpoint, even when we're talking about television, radio, and newspaper, they are not silos anymore. Every television station has digital assets and social media. Radio has digital assets and social media. Newspapers, the same. Any print publication, the same. So when you're talking about putting your messaging out there, it's not just as simple as I'm going to put a little bit of money here on TV, a little bit of money here on radio, and a little bit of money. It's across the board, and you have to make sure that you carve out enough, not only ad spend per se, but enough content, enough storytelling, to push that message out across those platforms, and to be able to manage it, make sure it's unified and consistent, to update it when things change on a dime. But I would absolutely think that one of the biggest changes is social media, and I would say that it will always continue to evolve and grow. And I actually think, I was reading an article recently that said that, it was probably just a year or two ago, whenever we wanted to find something out about a business, we would go and we would Google, look at Google reviews, or, that kind of thing. But now that's not even the case anymore. Now when someone wants to learn about your business, they're looking you up on Instagram, they're going to see if you're on TikTok, they're going to see if you have a YouTube channel. It's even just their first interaction with you is no longer, something as simple as visiting your website. It has evolved and grown so much more.
Now, we've all been in public relations, and a lot of us know the importance of public relations, but in the beginning of the pandemic, it seemed like those were some of the first jobs cut. So we need to keep advocating for the profession. So how do we convince everyone that public relations is important and it helps an organization meet its strategic goals? And I know you're telling students who haven't really been exposed to actual industry before that public relations is an important skill, an important thing to know about. So what do you do, Jessica?
Sure. So I think this is my favorite part about teaching at the College of St. Rose is that, so all of my students are required to take on a community client. And for a lot of the students, it's the first time, well, two things. One, it's the first time that they're really working in a team-based approach. Many students are kind of used to, I like to work by myself, I want to come to class, I want the professor to kind of go over the lecture notes, we'll do an exercise, we'll do a quiz, and then that's it. But that's not how my class works or functions. And I also don't want to stand in front of the class for an hour and change and talk all the time. So for the students, I want the class to be interactive. They take on work with the community client. I think over the time that I've been at the College of St. Rose, they've probably worked with over 20 or so different community clients over the last 2 years. And they actually go through creating a strategic advertising proposal or an integrated marketing communication plan for that client. So they're doing a SWOT analysis. They're having conversations with the client about internal and external audiences. They're having conversations with the clients about who are your competitors, what are your potential competitors in your field doing well, what are they not doing well, what are you doing well, what are you not doing well. And so there's this back and forth conversation that they're having with the client to arrive at the strategies and the tactics that they're going to create. So they're creating video for the clients, whether it's a PSA or a promo, depending on kind of what the topic is. They're creating a social media campaign. And when all that is said and done, the next thing that students are doing is they're presenting. So they have to become comfortable with public speaking. And so they're presenting their information to the class and then also to the client. The beautiful thing about that is that for some students, this is an experiential experience. And I always tell my students that my class is twofold. One, you're going to come in and work as a team. Two, you're going to, well, threefold. You're going to work with the client. And three, you're going to create a portfolio. That is the end goal for all the classes. You need to create content for a portfolio because you need to start thinking about either an internship or a potential job opportunity. The beauty of this is that in applying what the students are learning in the classroom, they're able to have those conversations about messaging. They're able to have those conversations about why these organizations need to understand the relevance of PR. They're able to have conversations about what does storytelling mean for that organization, and that telling your story matters. People need to know who you are and what you do beyond what you have on your website and beyond what you have on your social media pages. And I think that experience and that interaction really is something that the students enjoy. I've had students who, from the initial connection with clients, have had clients reach out to them and say, hey, can I hire you to continue doing work for my class? So then that shifted to us having conversations about how do you put together a contract, and how do you put together a price list, and how do you develop some kind of contract for working with these different clients and also different schedules. So for some students, some of them are thinking about, oh, I can end up becoming an entrepreneur and do this full time, as opposed to kind of thinking about applying for traditional jobs. I think that's what, in terms of the work that students are doing in the classroom, I think this is where they're able to share with these community clients that PR is relevant and needs to stay and be part of their day-to-day process.
It sounds like such a great experience for your students.
Yeah.
It makes me want to go back.
Join us.
Yes, maybe. I have thought about it. Okay, so Gina and actually Melissa, both of you have been agency environments where you've had to sell public relations services and show that it's something important. So I know, Gina, now you're also at Global Foundries and they embrace it, but how do we continue to advocate for PR?
I think one of the most important things that we can do in PR is to promote ourselves, do our own PR. A lot of times we're so busy doing our jobs and putting the content out there that we don't take the time to step back and show what we're doing and the metrics and that sort of thing. I do feel maybe more from an agent, when I was in the agency, we had to prove ourselves to our clients, but from a corporate perspective, I think of the time that our corporate communications officer, who's our big boss on my team, she had put together a presentation for our senior leadership team showing what we had done. And one of our senior leaders was like, I see all this communication come out and it's great, but I never really put two and two together that was coming out of, your group. So, it was great to connect those dots. And I think that doing that is very important, and to show how we are integral to the success of the company, and also to get people to understand what exactly it is we are doing and the value that we provide. But I also think that creating partnerships, both internally and with our external stakeholders, whether it might be our community partners or educational partners and chambers of commerce, PRSA, that is important too, because I think that they help they both sing our praises to a degree, and then also they start to see our value. And that just trickles down so that others see our value, and that word gets out there. So I think both those things, doing our own PR and building partnerships, are both very important.
That's a great point. Thank you. And hopefully you've all gotten some exposure being on this panel too. So Melissa, you're in that same boat.
Yeah. You're right. And a lot of the times, with our clients, we do have to make sure that we kind of, well, proof is in the pudding, right? So you know, we make sure that we always have, you know, case studies, referrals, you know, any kind of positive feedback that our clients can provide. You know, we do look at it as much more of a relationship building opportunity, as much as we, you know, consume, you know, all this content online or, you know, through virtual exchanges. You know, word of mouth is still an extremely powerful tool that is very accessible, and you know, even through just, you know, brief interactions with someone, you know, if they have a positive experience with your agency and they share that with somebody, that comfort and that confidence is already instilled, so they come to you directly. So making sure that, you know, not only the quality of the work that we do for our clients is important, but the experience that they have as well is just as important for us. I think the other thing too is, I mean, there's so many services out there that can, how do I word this politely, that can make it easier for somebody to do that work internally, and give them the confidence of, you know, being able to use social media and being able to use the, you know, services like Canva, or, you know, so they can do graphic design. And those services are absolutely, you know, helpful, and they're great tools. And, you know, I encourage, you know, clients to have a familiar, you know, to be familiar with those. But I think it's important that we remember that, you know, there are people who are experts in their field, right? If I want to, you know, go to the dentist because I need to get work done on my teeth, and, you know, an eye doctor comes in, they're both doctors, but one's going to be a little bit better in one area than the other. So to be able to have that trust in knowing that you have, you know, an expert that is immersed in that field, that knows the market, that has those relationships and that network, I think makes us very valuable. And I think, you know, the last point I will make is, you know, I think one of the big struggles we face is there's so many other, you know, agencies, right? You know, Relentless is not the only agency, but that means we have so many other businesses that, you know, are vying for the same relationships that we are, that are trying to build and develop the same relationships that we are. So, you know, going back to that positive experience, you know, we need to make sure that we are an asset, because we're, you know, they don't have to do business with us, so we need to make sure that they want to do business with us. And I think that the other thing too is, you know, when we're talking about businesses and going through pandemics or any adverse time, you know, one of the main areas they always want to run to cut spending is in like the PR, marketing, advertising area. Yet when something challenging happens, they look to you and say, "What do we do?" So I think there's value in that, knowing that if we are the department, if we are the team, if we are the resource that you turn to when you're in a panic or when you're worried or when you're backed into a corner, I think there's value to be said there too. That obviously we're a resource, and that you do need us, and that there is value in the services we provide.
Judy,
Yeah.
I'm sure
So
schools
most
felt backed into a corner in this past time.
Yeah, so most of what you just said, Melissa, there are parallels to our service. We actually have grown exponentially through the pandemic and became our own division in July. So we were a communications service, and we're now the engagement and development division as a result of the asks and the desire and the need for communication support across New York. And there are other BOCES who provide communication services. They're just not like ours. And we have word of mouth, we have reputation, and I think some of the challenges we face now are living up to those, because we have not, we have also experienced the Great Resignation, but more so the growth has led to us just scrambling to try to find qualified people to help serve districts. And so that has been a challenge, but continuing to provide this, you know, high quality level of service to districts is something that, you know, takes up a lot of time, because we're training staff, we're bringing staff on board, and not just to do, you know, day-to-day communications work, but learn our philosophy and our approach to school communications. And, you know, we, in the beginning of 2020, all of the folks who served our districts were in the title of communications communications specialist. And prior to the pandemic, we had started discussing different titles. We have a team of graphic artists. We would bring folks on who had video skills. We don't have a videographer title, but we created a digital content specialist position and have started to change how we serve districts to be more confident and also give better service. So we have folks who specialize in social media, digital content strategy, but then we also have our communication specialists who are giving high-level crisis strategy and support, but also, just navigating challenges and being a strategic advisor to leadership. And those teams have to work together. So it's changed quite a bit, but it's also being able to speak about why it's more valuable for them to invest in multiple people and really build a small team for the district to do the work so that their communications is better. And it's also shifted messaging-wise from really being in this safety and security to, okay, so you just made it through the pandemic, and now what? Like, now is not the time to reduce communication service. Most of our districts don't feel that way, but we've started to talk more about them understanding, like, districts have a brand too, and districts need to understand that their community connection, their credibility, and really the community's trust in them has definitely waned in some ways, and by investing in communications and investing in us, we can help them tell the stories that make up who their district is and really build that community support back.
So we all agree on the importance of public relations and communications, and there's so many new skills. So my final question is, what advice would you offer someone who is either new to the PR industry or thinking about a career in PR? So Gina, would you kick that off?
Sure. My advice would be step outside your comfort zone as much as you can. Not only do you learn about your own skills, what you love and don't love, what you like to do, what you don't like to do, but you learn things about yourself to find ways to adapt, evolve, grow, and learn. You can learn from both your successes and your failures. I don't consider anything really a failure. If you learn from it and move forward, it was a great opportunity, right? It's not a failure, it's an opportunity. And I know I've never regretted stepping out of my comfort zone, and I think that it's not comfortable, right? That's why it's called a comfort zone, but it's definitely worth doing. And I feel like the best moments of my life, the best opportunities of my life, the best growth of my life has happened when I have stepped outside my comfort zone. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. Melissa?
Well, I think just career advice would be understand that you will be working at least 40 hours a week for this organization, or this business. Make sure it is a place that you are comfortable with. Make sure it's a space that you are, that you want to be there, right? You should want to be there. Because at the end of the day, if you do not feel that is a good fit for you, if you are just complacent and content, if you're just going through the motions, you are not serving your career, you're not serving yourself, and you're not the best employee that you can be. So you're not producing the quality of work that you are capable of. So my first career advice would be, wherever you want to decide to land, take the time to make sure it works for you. And it doesn't have to. You're not going to get it right the first time, second time, the third time. It took me a handful of times, but I figured it out. And I think the other thing for public relations specifically, be a sponge. Learn as much as you can, because there's so much overlap with this field. It translates to marketing, advertising, journalism. I mean, it all kind of works and molds and meshes together, and it doesn't have to be at an agency setting. It can be at a not-for-profit setting. It can be at an educational setting. You can take it in any industry. So really just be a sponge and learn from as many people as you can. Learn as many skills as you can, even if you're not a master in all. just be able to know your way around it. And I think that would be the biggest thing is really just soak up as much info as you can from as many people as you can.
Yeah, I would say that find a mentor, talk to different people, connect with them. I wished that I had abandoned the idea of coming off as if I knew what I was doing and that I was going to do it perfectly much sooner than I actually did in my career. I read a book called Brave, Not Perfect, and it's specifically meant for women, and it is about abandoning that idea of perfectionism, which, you know, in our society, women have been raised to be perfect and have good behavior and do all of the things the way they're supposed to be done. And it dives into that, and it's based off of growth mindset, but it's really about being courageous and being unafraid to try something even if you're not good at it. And having, you know, read that and studied it a bit more, I have shifted so much about who I am and what I do personally and professionally, not just in public relations. But I'm, the staff here who I work with will laugh at me because I always say I would never want perfection to stand in the way of growth. And there really is looking for excellence in what we do, and learning how to get there is just as important. And that really has been something that, not a regret, but I certainly wish that I was more focused on what I could do and learn about and, you know, eventually get better at, versus feeling like I need to come in here and make it seem like I know what I'm talking about, what I'm doing. So that would be my advice.
Jessica, I'm sure you're always talking to people thinking about a career in public relations. So what
Sure.
advice do you have for them?
So I feel like I have three things, and I echo the same thing that, you know, my panelists have talked about in terms of becoming comfortable, making sure that you do some research about the spaces that you're going to, and then knowing that in what you're doing, that it's okay to be brave and not perfect, and just get the job done. I think the things that I would add to that are just thinking about how can you be your most authentic self. It's always a challenge to be the person in the room that wants to stand out differently, but in this specific field, when we think about some of the PR campaigns that we've seen that have really resonated with us, it was the individuals that were willing to stand out, especially when everyone wanted to kind of echo and say the same sentiment or share the same story. They were the ones that stood out that we really resonated with. I'd also say, and we all mentioned this in different ways, build your network. The network of people that you have are going to be the ones that are going to support you. They're going to be the ones that are going to champion you, and you're going to be the ones that are always looking for different ways to mentor and also advise you. I know coming here I was nervous, and I had several friends that were texting me, and one of my friends sent me a text, and Julie, she's like, you know, you rock, do you know who you are? And so these are friendships that I've had for, you know, when I think about all the different friendships that I've had, these are friendships and people that I've known for 15 years, 20 years and counting. So it's really important to maintain and build your network because they will help you in so many different ways. And I think the last thing that I think about, and it's something that's important to me personally, is embrace joy. Life is hard. And this pandemic, like I said, we've talked about how it changed the way we live, work, and connect, but we all need to embrace joy in so many different ways. At the end of the day, I know Melissa talked about if you're working like 40 hours a week, at the end of the day, or at what point in the day are you taking time to do something that brings you joy? Whether it's that first cup of coffee, whether it's that slice of pizza, whether it's going for a walk, you need to embrace joy. So that's something that I do personally, that's something that I tell my daughter to do all the time, and that's something that I tell my students to do all the time, because when you embrace joy, regardless of the challenges that you face, you can thrive and not just merely look to survive.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience for our panelists? No? All right, well, we'll use this time then to individually network and get to know each other. So thank you so much for joining us. We're back in person again next year.
Did she just pronounce the questions?
I love that. I didn't know. The question.
Yes, yes.